There is a dangerous kind of caring that will steal your peace, suffocate your joy, and leave you hollow in rooms full of people who never truly saw you. You have spent years holding yourself hostage to opinions that were never yours to carry. You have twisted yourself into shapes that made others comfortable while your own body ached from the contortion. You have silenced your laughter because someone once told you it was too loud. You have dimmed your light because your brightness made insecure people squint. You have apologized for taking up space in a world that should have made room for you from the beginning. And somewhere in all that bending, all that shrinking, all that desperate seeking of approval from people who were never going to give it freely, you forgot something essential. You forgot that your worth was never up for debate. You forgot that your value does not increase or decrease based on someone's ability to see it. You forgot that you were whole before anyone ever told you that you were broken. The weight you have been carrying was never yours to lift. Those expectations, those judgments, those measuring sticks held up by people who could not even measure their own hearts. They do not define you. They never did. But you believed they could. You believed that if you just cared a little more, tried a little harder, gave a little more of yourself away, eventually you would earn the acceptance you were chasing. Eventually you would be enough. But here is what no one tells you about that kind of caring. It is bottomless. It has no floor. You can pour your entire self into it and still be told you are not sufficient. You can sacrifice your truth, your time, your energy, your dignity, and still wake up feeling like you failed some invisible test you did not even know you were taking. There are people walking this earth right now who have spent decades seeking validation from parents who withheld love like it was a limited resource, from partners who made affection conditional on obedience, from friends who only called when they needed something, from societies that built their comfort on your silence. And the exhaustion of that pursuit, the soul-deep weariness of constantly proving yourself to people who have already decided you will never be proof enough, it breaks something sacred inside you. It breaks your ability to rest. It breaks your capacity for joy. It breaks your connection to your own instincts, your own voice, your own knowing. Because when you are always performing for an audience that will never applaud, you forget what it feels like to simply be. You forget what it sounds like when your own heart speaks. You forget that there is a difference between being loved and being tolerated, between being valued and being used, between being seen and being surveyed for flaws. The heartbreak of invisibility is not that people cannot see you. It is that you made yourself so small, so quiet, so palatable, that even you stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror. The abandonment that cuts deepest is not when others leave. It is when you abandon yourself to chase their approval. The rejection that leaves scars is not their no. It is the 1,000 times you said no to your own needs, your own dreams, your own truth, because you were afraid of losing people who were never truly present in the first place. Shame has a way of convincing you that you are the problem, that if you were just better, kinder, quieter, smaller, easier, less complicated, less sensitive, less much, then you would finally be acceptable. Shame tells you that your struggles are character flaws rather than responses to circumstances. It tells you that your pain is drama rather than a legitimate response to harm. It convinces you that asking for what you need is selfish, that having boundaries is cruel, that prioritizing yourself is abandonment, and loneliness, real loneliness, is not being alone. Real loneliness is sitting in a room full of people who know your name but not your story. It is having conversations that never touch anything true. It is being surrounded by humans who expect you to show up for them while offering nothing in return but criticism dressed up as concern. It is the specific ache of being needed but not known, utilized but not understood, present but not seen. Generational pain taught many of us that love requires suffering, that devotion means dissolving, That family means tolerating disrespect because blood is supposed to be thicker than dignity. We watched our mothers bend until they broke. We watched our grandmothers swallow their voices to keep the peace. We learned that caring meant carrying everyone else's burdens while our own backs bent under the weight. We inherited the belief that our feelings were inconvenient, our needs were selfish, our boundaries were betrayals. But a caged bird does not forget how to sing. Even when the bars are generational, even when the lock was placed by people who claimed it was for your own good, even when you have been told so many times that this cage is safety and the sky is danger, something in you remembers flight. Something in you remembers the feeling of wind under wings you have been told you do not have. Something in you knows that survival is not the same as living, that endurance is not the same as thriving, that making it through is not the same as making it home to yourself. Your scars are not evidence that you are damaged. They are proof that you survived what was meant to break you. Every wound that healed, even the ones that healed imperfectly, leaving you changed, leaving you marked, those are testimonies to your resilience. Those are maps of battles you fought alone. Those are monuments to the strength that kept you breathing when the world told you to stop taking up oxygen. Storms do not apologize for shaping trees. Wind does not feel guilty for making roots dig deeper. And you do not owe anyone an explanation for how you had to adapt to survive conditions that should never have been imposed on you. The ways you learned to protect yourself, to shut down, to disappear, to perform, to accommodate, those were not weaknesses. Those were intelligent responses to environments that were not safe for your full humanity. Roots grow in the dark, unseen, unwitnessed, doing the quiet work that makes visible growth possible. And so much of your strength has been subterranean, happening in places no one applauded, in moments no one documented, in private battles you won simply by deciding to wake up and try again. You do not need an audience for your survival to matter. You do not need validation for your endurance to be real. You do not need permission to acknowledge that you have been fighting wars in your own heart while maintaining a smile on your face. There was a woman who spent 40 years making herself smaller. She learned early that her opinions disrupted dinner tables, that her laughter embarrassed her mother, that her questions made teachers uncomfortable, that her presence took up space that others felt entitled to occupy. So she learned to fold herself up like a letter no one wanted to read. She learned to speak in whispers. She learned to apologize for existing. She married a man who preferred her diminished, who liked that she had been pre-trained to disappear, who benefited from her belief that she was lucky anyone wanted her at all. For decades, she served him, organized her life around his needs, his moods, his comfort. She became an expert at reading his face, predicting his reactions, managing his emotions. She forgot she had her own. When he left her for someone younger, someone he described as more fun, more easygoing, less complicated, she did what she had always done. She blamed herself. She made a list of all the ways she had failed him. She wondered if she had been too much or not enough. She considered what she could have done differently to make him stay. But in the silence he left behind, something unexpected happened. She heard herself. For the first time in 4 decades, there was no one to manage, no one to accommodate, no one to perform for. And in that quiet space, a voice she thought she had lost forever began to speak. It said small things at first. I am tired. I am angry. I did not deserve that. I am not the problem. Slowly she began making decisions based on what she wanted rather than what would make others comfortable. She painted her walls colors her ex-husband had forbidden. She took up space at the grocery store instead of apologizing for being in the way. She said no without explanation. She said yes without guilt. She stopped editing herself in conversations. She stopped shrinking her joy to match other people's misery, and people did not like it. Her grown children told her she had changed, said it with accusation in their voices, as if her prior diminishment detachment had been her natural state rather than a survival strategy. Her friends, who had grown comfortable with her always saying yes, began calling her selfish, but for the first time in her life, she understood that being called selfish by people who had been using her was not an insult. It was confirmation that she was finally valuing herself as much as she had valued them. There was a child who learned that love was conditional. His parents loved the version of him that was obedient, quiet, successful in the specific ways they had decided success should look. They did not love the version of him that struggled, that asked for help, that did not fit their image. So he became an expert at hiding. He showed them the straight A's and hid the panic attacks. He showed them the scholarship and hid the depression. He showed them the career and hid the emptiness. For years, he believed that if he just achieved enough, earned enough, impressed enough, eventually he would feel the unconditional love he had been seeking. Eventually, they would see him, not just his accomplishments. Eventually, he would be enough without having to constantly prove it. But the goalposts kept moving. Every achievement was met with a new expectation. Every success was followed by a question about the next one. When he finally broke down, when the mask cracked, and he could no longer maintain the performance, he waited for his parents to ask what was wrong. He waited for them to see the human beneath the achievements. Instead, they told him to pull himself together. They told him he had so much to be grateful for. They told him other people had it worse. They told him everything except, "I see you and I am sorry." And in that moment of complete visibility, when he had finally shown them the truth of his struggle and been met with dismissal, he understood something that changed everything. Their inability to see him had nothing to do with his worth. It had everything to do with their limitations. They could not hold space for his pain because they had never learned to hold space for their own. They could not offer him unconditional love because no one had ever offered it to them. Their rejection of his vulnerability was not evidence that he was broken. It was evidence that they were operating from their own unhealed wounds. He stopped waiting for their approval. He stopped measuring his worth by their capacity to recognize it. He found people who could sit with him in his struggle without trying to fix him or shame him out of it. He learned that chosen family can sometimes love you better than blood ever did. He learned that sometimes honoring your parents means accepting that they gave what they could, even when what they could give was not enough. He learned that you can love people from a distance when proximity costs you your peace. There was a person who survived something unspeakable, something that happened in childhood, something that shaped how they understood safety, trust, their own body. For years, they told no one. They carried it alone, the way you carry a stone in your chest, heavy and cold and constant. They believed, as many survivors do, that it was somehow their fault, that they had done something to invite it, that speaking about it would only bring shame on themselves. When they finally gathered the courage to tell their story, to name what happened, to seek acknowledgement and support, some people believed them, but others did not. Others questioned their memory, their motives, their timing. Others suggested they were seeking attention, making too much of something that was probably not as bad as they remembered. Others protected the person who harmed them because that person was likable, successful, impossible to imagine as someone capable of such cruelty. And the second violation, the one that came from not being believed, from being told their truth was inconvenient, from being expected to stay quiet to protect other people's comfort, it cut even deeper than the first. Because the original harm happened in childhood when they were powerless. But the silencing, the doubting, the demand that they prioritize the reputation of their abuser over their own healing, that happened when they were old enough to know they deserved better. they learned something crucial in that moment. That truth-telling is not about convincing doubters. It is about honoring your own experience. It is about refusing to be complicit in your own silencing. It is about understanding that people who are invested in maintaining comfortable lies will always be threatened by inconvenient truths. And their discomfort with your truth does not make your truth less true. It makes their comfort less important than it once seemed. They stop seeking validation from people who were never going to give it. They stop trying to make their trauma palatable enough for others to swallow. They spoke their truth and let others do what they would with it. They built a life around people who believe survivors without needing a trial. They learned that healing does not require an apology from the person who hurt you. It requires you finally believing that you deserved better, even if no one else ever admits it. Before I continue, answer one question, honestly. When was the last time you made a decision based purely on what you wanted, without first calculating how it would make everyone else feel? If you are still listening, something inside you is remembering who you are. Beneath all the conditioning, beneath all the fear, beneath all the ways you learned to make yourself acceptable, there is a part of you that never forgot your worth. There is a part of you that survived every attempt to diminish it. There is a part of you that has been waiting, sometimes patiently, sometimes desperately, for you to remember that you do not need anyone's permission to claim your own life. The less you care about the opinions of people who do not truly know you, the more space you create for your own voice to emerge. The less you invest in relationships that require you to diminish yourself to maintain them, the more energy you have for connections that actually nourish you. The less you chase validation from sources that were never going to freely give it, the more you realize that the only validation that ever truly mattered was your own. This is not about becoming hard. It is not about building walls so high that no one can reach you. It is not about deciding that everyone is an enemy and that trust is foolish. This is about discernment. This is about understanding that not everyone deserves access to your softness. This is about recognizing that protecting your peace is not the same as denying your humanity. This is about learning that boundaries are not punishments you inflict on others, but gifts you give yourself. You survive by learning who sees you and who only sees what you can do for them. You endure by understanding the difference between people who love you and people who love how you make them feel. You rise by refusing to accept crumbs from tables where you should be invited to feast. You heal by finally directing toward yourself the same compassion you have spent your whole life extending to people who never returned it. Self-acceptance is not a destination. It is a practice. Some days you will wake up and feel completely at home in yourself. Other days you will struggle with the same doubts, the same insecurities, the same fears that have haunted you for years. And that is not failure. That is being human. The goal is not to arrive at some permanent state of unshakable confidence. The goal is to keep choosing yourself even when it feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, risky. Self-respect means you stop explaining yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you. It means you stop defending your boundaries to people who benefit from you not having any. It means you stop tolerating disrespect just because it comes from someone you love, or someone you have history with, or someone who occasionally treats you well enough to make you forget how often they treat you poorly. Inner freedom is understanding that you cannot control what others think of you, but you can control how much power you give their opinions. It is recognizing that someone's inability to appreciate you is not a reflection of your value, but a reflection of their vision. It is accepting that you will be misunderstood, misrepresented, mischaracterized by people who never bothered to truly know you, and deciding that their version of you is not your responsibility to correct. Choosing truth over fear means you speak even when your voice shakes. It means you set boundaries even when you are afraid of losing people. It means you honor your needs even when you have been taught that doing so is selfish. It means you walk away from situations that harm you even when no one else understands why. It means you trust your own experience even when others try to convince you that you are too sensitive, too emotional, too much. You survive the moments when you finally say enough. When you stop accepting behavior you would never tolerate from a stranger just because it comes from family. When you stop making excuses for people who show you through consistent action that they do not value you. When you stop waiting for people to change and start accepting who they have shown themselves to be. You endure the discomfort of growth, the growing pains of learning to take up space, the awkwardness of using your voice after years of silence, the guilt that comes when you start prioritizing yourself after a lifetime of putting everyone else first, the grief of releasing relationships that no longer serve you, even when you once loved those people deeply. You rise every time you choose your truth over someone else's comfort. Every time you say this does not work for me, instead of silently tolerating what hurts you. Every time you ask for what you need instead of hoping someone will guess. Every time you honor your boundaries instead of apologizing for having them. Every time you walk away from what diminishes you and toward what honors you. There is a specific kind of happiness that comes from radical self-acceptance, not the shallow happiness of constant pleasure or the absence of problems, but the deep, quiet contentment of knowing yourself and liking what you find, of having flaws and not seeing them as reasons you do not deserve love, of having made mistakes and not defining yourself by them, of carrying scars and seeing them as proof of your survival rather than marks of your failure. There is a freedom in no longer performing for people who were never truly watching, in no longer editing yourself to fit into spaces that were too small for your full humanity, in no longer explaining your choices to people who would judge them regardless of your reasoning, in no longer seeking approval from people whose standards you could never meet because those standards were designed to keep you striving and never arriving. The world will try to convince you that caring less makes you cold, that protecting your peace makes you selfish, that having boundaries makes you difficult, that prioritizing yourself makes you unkind. But these are lies told by people who benefited from your self-sacrifice. These are manipulations designed to keep you compliant, available, endlessly giving with no expectation of receiving. Caring less about the wrong things creates space to care more about the right things. Caring less about impressing strangers creates space to care more about nurturing genuine connections. Caring less about meeting arbitrary standards creates space to care more about your actual well-being. Caring less about being liked by everyone creates space to care more about being respected by people who matter. Your voice matters, not because it sounds like what others expect, not because it says what others want to hear, but because it is yours, because you earned it through years of silence, because you claimed it in the face of people who tried to take it from you, because it carries truth that someone somewhere needs to hear so they know they are not alone in what they have survived, what they feel, what they know to be true, despite what they have been told. You do not owe your story to people who will weaponize it against you. You do not owe your softness to people who exploit it. You do not owe your time to people who waste it. You do not owe your energy to people who drain it. You do not owe your presence to people who make you feel absent from yourself. What you owe yourself is honesty, the honesty to admit when something is not working, the honesty to acknowledge when you are staying out of fear rather than love, the honesty to recognize when you are accepting less than you deserve because you have been convinced you do not deserve more, the honesty to name what hurts, even when naming it changes everything. What you owe yourself is compassion, the compassion to forgive yourself for the times you stayed too long, gave too much, believed too easily, the compassion to acknowledge that you did the best you could with the awareness you had at the time, the compassion to understand that healing is not linear, that setbacks are not failures, that progress sometimes looks like standing still while you gather strength for the next step. What you owe yourself is advocacy. The advocacy to speak up when you are being treated poorly. The advocacy to ask for what you need without shame. The advocacy to defend your boundaries when others try to cross them. The advocacy to choose yourself even when it disappoints people who expected you to keep choosing them at your own expense. There will be people who are angry when you stop caring what they think, who are offended when you stop performing for their approval, who accuse you of changing when really you are just stopping the performance and showing them who you have always been beneath it, who claim you are being selfish when really you are just finally being fair to yourself. Let them be angry. Let them be offended. Let them be confused. Their feelings about your liberation are not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to honor the life you have been given by actually living it, not by spending it trying to earn acceptance from people who made acceptance conditional on your diminishment. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to grow with you. You are allowed to change your mind about what you want and who you are becoming. You are allowed to want different things than you wanted before. You are allowed to close doors you once fought to open when you realize what is on the other side is not what you need. You are allowed to leave spaces where you are tolerated in search of spaces where you are celebrated. The woman who finds her voice after 40 years of silence does not need to justify her volume to people who benefited from her muteness. The child who learns self-worth after a lifetime of conditional love does not need to explain his boundaries to parents who never respected them. The survivor who speaks their truth does not need to convince doubters in order for that truth to be valid. The person who finally chooses themselves does not need permission from people they are choosing to disappoint. Your happiness is not a betrayal of the people who stayed miserable. Your healing is not an insult to people who refuse to begin their own. Your growth is not an abandonment of people who are determined to stay stagnant. Your freedom is not a judgment of people who remain in cages they could leave if they chose to. You are not responsible for other people's comfort with your evolution. You are not required to stay small so others do not feel intimidated by your expansion. You are not obligated to dim your light so others do not have to confront their own darkness. You are not expected to fail so others do not feel inadequate in their own lack of effort. Be gentle with yourself as you unlearn the lies, as you release the beliefs that kept you bound, as you shed the identities you constructed to survive environments that are no longer your reality, as you remember slowly, sometimes painfully, who you were before the world told you who you should be. Be patient with yourself as you practice new ways of being, as you stumble through setting boundaries for the first time, as you feel guilty for saying no even when no is the right answer, as you navigate the discomfort of taking up space after years of making yourself small, as you learn to trust your own voice after years of being told it was wrong,